He told me he wanted someone young and thin while I was rinsing the dinner plates, and the sound of the water almost covered the words. Almost. It was January 14th, 2024, a Sunday night in our apartment in Brooklyn, and the radiators were hissing like they were trying to warn me. 25 years of marriage, and that was the sentence that broke something so deep inside me I couldn't feel the floor under my feet for a second. I remember my hands trembling over the sink, the warm water filling the kitchen with steam, and the way he didn't even look at me when he said it. As if my body, the one he had touched and slept beside for half his life, had suddenly become an inconvenience he needed to say out loud. I didn't speak right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because there are moments when silence becomes the only thing protecting you from collapsing. He kept scrolling through his phone, sitting at the small table near the window, tapping the side of his thumb on the wood like he was waiting for me to agree. The refrigerator hummed. A car alarm wailed outside, and all I could hear was the echo of his words tightening around my ribs. Someone young and thin. It wasn't new. Not really. There had been comments for years disguised as advice. Jokes at parties. The way his eyes hovered a little too long on other women's bodies, especially the ones I could never resemble. But something in the way he said it that night, flat, bored, as if he were describing a craving for a different brand of toothpaste, told me he had rehearsed it. That he had already imagined a version of his life where I didn't exist. I dried my hands slowly, pressing the towel against my skin until the fabric warmed. My reflection in the dark window was faint, blurred, a large silhouette with soft shoulders and hair graying at the temples. For years I had learned to see myself through the distorted lens of his disapproval, shrinking inward to avoid taking up space. But that night, something inside me shifted, not loudly, but with the quiet certainty of a crack traveling through ice. I'm from Newark originally, but I moved to Brooklyn after marrying him at 26. I was a nurse then, working long shifts, always tired, always eating on the go, always putting everyone else first. My weight had fluctuated my entire life, but after my mother died in 2010, I gained almost 60 pounds in a year. Grief sits heavy on the body, especially when eating is the only thing that shuts out the world for a moment. He didn't like that weight. He didn't like how my hips widened, or how my thighs rubbed together, or how my arms softened. I learned to avoid mirrors. I learned to buy clothes late at night, so no one would see me in the plus-size section. I learned to turn my body sideways in public spaces, as if apologizing for its existence. 25 years is enough time to become a ghost of yourself without noticing. But that night his cruelty became too clear to ignore. When I finally turned toward him, he looked surprised that I was looking back. His eyes flicked to my face, then to my stomach, then back to the phone, as if the sight of me confirmed something he had already decided. I asked him what he meant. I asked it quietly, without anger, because I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. He sighed, God, that sigh, and started talking about how he felt held back, how he was tired of people assuming things about his life because of how I looked. He said he wanted to feel proud standing next to someone. Proud. As if I had been a shame he had carried for too long. I think that was the moment my heart detached from him completely. I left the kitchen and went to our bedroom, pretending I needed something from the dresser, just so he wouldn't see the way my hands were shaking. The bed looked too familiar, too worn, like a place I had slept but never truly rested. I sat on the edge and stared at the framed photos on our wall, vacations, anniversaries, birthdays, and noticed something I had never allowed myself to see. In every picture, I stood slightly behind him, angled toward him, making myself smaller without realizing it. Maybe he had loved me once. Maybe I had made it too easy for him to stop. The next morning, Brooklyn felt colder than usual. I walked to the Q train with my coat half-buttoned, breathing clouds into the air, my mind replaying every comment he had made about my body across the years. The jokes in front of friends. The quiet corrections about what I should or shouldn't eat. The way he stopped touching me after 2018, claiming work stress, back pain, exhaustion. Anything but the truth that he no longer desired me. I work at Mount Sinai Hospital now, in the cardiology wing. The hallways smell like disinfectant and hope and loss all at once. My coworkers know me as the calm one, the steady one, the one who can handle anything. But that morning, as I tightened the straps of my scrubs, I could feel the weight of everything I had swallowed for decades pressing against my throat. Around noon, during my break, I went to the staff bathroom and locked the door. The mirror above the sink was small and harshly lit, but I forced myself to look. Really look. My skin was beautiful, deep and reflective, even with the tiredness beneath my eyes. My cheeks were full, my lips soft. My hair, starting to gray at the edges, framed my face in a way I used to love. My body was large and strong and carried memories of every life I had saved, every shift I had survived, every year I had endured. I whispered to my reflection, almost testing the words, I deserved better. I didn't know if I believed it yet, but the sentence felt like a seed being pushed into soil. Small, fragile, but alive. When I unlocked the door, a coworker named Janelle was walking by. She asked if I was okay, and I lied, saying I was just tired. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on me. People know when something is wrong, even when you pretend nothing is. Later that day, something happened that made the cracks inside me spread wider. I got a text from my husband. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an attempt to fix anything. It wasn't even disguised as concern. It was a photo of a woman. Young, thin, smiling, and a message underneath. This is the energy I'm talking about. I felt the floor tilt. My pulse thudded in my ears. And while the hospital buzzed around me, monitors beeping, carts rolling, voices echoing, the world inside my chest went silent with a cold clarity I had never felt before. That was the moment something in me woke up. Not anger. Not sadness. A decision. I didn't answer his message. I stared at the screen until the edges of the photo blurred, until her smile felt like a blade pressed against my throat. The woman looked no older than 28, maybe 30 at most. Long straight hair, bright skin, a tiny waist he had probably imagined his hands around. I wondered if he had already touched her. I wondered if he had rehearsed telling me he wanted someone young and thin because she already existed in the shadows of his decisions. The phone vibrated again. Another message, this time just a thumbs-up emoji, as if he were congratulating himself for being honest. As if cruelty were a form of bravery. I locked the phone and shoved it into my pocket, but it felt like it was burning through the fabric. I walked through the corridor toward the elevator, each step heavier than the last. My chest tightened. My throat burned. I pressed the down button and waited, staring at the reflections on the metal doors. I couldn't recognize myself in them. I looked like a stranger standing inside a life I no longer fit into. When I reached the lobby, I stepped outside for air. The cold wind slapped my face, but it didn't ground me the way it usually did. I kept hearing his sentence replaying over and over, as if the universe wanted me to memorize every detail of the moment I finally saw the truth about my marriage. Someone young and thin. A passing taxi splashed a puddle against the curb, and droplets landed on my shoes. Normally I would have cursed under my breath, but I just stood there frozen. Not from the cold, but from a realization settling into me like sediment drifting to the bottom of a lake. He didn't love me. Not anymore. Maybe not for years. And somewhere inside me, beneath layers of pain and habit, a quiet truth rose to the surface. I didn't love the woman I had become with him either. When my shift ended, I took the train home. The subway was packed, and as always, I tried to take up as little space as possible, angling my body sideways, squeezing my arms close to my sides. But that day it felt different. Wrong. Like I was obeying a rule that no longer applied to me. When we passed over the Manhattan Bridge, I watched the lights reflect on the water and thought about how many years I had spent shrinking, folding myself into corners to avoid being noticed. At the apartment, he was watching TV, feet propped on the table. He didn't even mute the show when I walked in. He just glanced at me and nodded, as if we were roommates, not partners of 25 years. The smell of leftover Chinese takeout lingered in the air. "Did you get my message?" he asked. I said yes. My voice was flat, steady. I surprised myself. He waited for me to react. To cry, to argue, to beg. He expected some version of the woman who used to apologize for taking up space in her own home. But I didn't give him that. I asked him who she was. He shrugged, letting out a breath like I was exhausting him. Just someone I follow. Inspiration. Motivation. Something you should think about, honestly. Something inside me fractured cleanly, like glass breaking into perfect shards. I walked past him and went straight to the bedroom. The air smelled like his cologne, the same scent he'd worn since the year we married. I opened the closet, looking at the rows of clothes I kept even when they no longer fit, hoping someday they would. Dresses I loved but never wore. Jeans that mocked me from their hangers. Shirts I bought because he said they were flattering, which really meant they hid the parts of me he wished were smaller. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, letting the silence wrap around me. My hands were trembling again, not from fear this time, but from a kind of awakening that felt both terrifying and necessary. At around 11 p.m., he came into the room. He didn't sit beside me. He stood near the doorway, leaning on the frame. "Look, Angela," he said. "I didn't mean it to sound cruel. I just think we're at a point where we need to be honest about what we want." I stared at him, really stared, as if seeing him for the first time. His face looked unfamiliar, older, heavier in ways he somehow believed were acceptable only for men. His hair was thinning, his stomach pushing against the hem of his shirt, but none of that had ever mattered to me. I had loved him anyway, and he had taken that love for granted. "I want something different," he continued. "I want someone who takes care of herself. Someone who doesn't give up." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I asked him if that was what he thought I had done. Given up. He hesitated. That pause told me everything. The truth formed inside me like lightning, sharp and illuminating. I stood up. My legs steadied beneath me with a strength I didn't know I still had. I looked him in the eyes, really looked, and he faltered for the first time that night. You want someone young and thin, I said quietly. You want someone who makes you feel better about yourself. But let me tell you the truth you've been too afraid to face. His jaw tightened. You didn't lose me because I'm fat. You lost me because you made me feel invisible. He blinked, taken aback, as if he had expected anything but honesty. I walked past him, leaving the bedroom. My feet felt strangely light, as though my body had been waiting for this moment for years. When I reached the hallway, my pulse calmed. There was a stillness inside me, not peaceful, not triumphant, but certain. The next morning, everything felt sharper. The light through the window. The cold tiles under my feet. The smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. I dressed slowly, choosing clothes that felt comfortable, not flattering. When I walked into the living room, he was at the table, tapping anxiously on his phone. His eyes flicked to me, searching for the version of me he could manage. I didn't give it to him. I told him I needed time. Space. Distance to think. He opened his mouth to protest, but for once I didn't let him speak. I grabbed my bag, put on my coat, and left the apartment. The air outside felt easier to breathe, even though the wind stung my cheeks. I didn't know where I was going exactly, but I found myself walking toward Prospect Park. The trees were bare, branches like dark sketches against the winter sky. I sat on a bench near the lake, watching ducks glide across the water. My hands were cold, but my chest felt warm in a way I couldn't explain. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about him. I was thinking about me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't check it. Instead, I focused on the quiet around me. The distant laughter of kids, the crunch of footsteps on frozen ground, the way the sunlight hit the water in sharp, silvery lines. And then something unexpected happened. A woman I recognized from the hospital walked by. Her name was Teresa. We'd talked only a handful of times, but she always smiled at me in a way that felt genuine. She stopped when she saw me. "Angela?" she said. "Are you okay?" I opened my mouth to lie, but the truth spilled out instead. "No, not really." She sat beside me without hesitation, her expression softening. "Tell me." And so I did. Not everything, not the deepest parts, but enough for her to understand that I was standing at the edge of a life I no longer knew how to live. When I finished, she put a hand on mine. "You deserve someone who celebrates you," she said. "Not someone who makes you feel small." The words sank into me, heavy and warm. I thanked her. She squeezed my hand gently before standing to leave. As she walked away, I felt something shift inside me again. Not a crack this time. A beginning. That afternoon, when I finally checked my phone, I saw a message from my husband. "We need to talk." For the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid of that sentence. I felt ready. When I got home that evening, the apartment felt strangely quiet, as if the walls were holding their breath. He was sitting on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He looked up when I walked in, his expression somewhere between defensive and uncertain. For years I had read his moods like weather patterns, adjusting myself to avoid storms. But now, standing in the doorway with the cold air still clinging to my coat, I felt detached, as if I were watching him from a distance. He asked where I had been. Not out of concern, but irritation disguised as worry. I answered simply that I needed air. He exhaled sharply, like he was trying to pull me back into my old shape, into the version of me he could control through silence and subtle shame. He said he wanted to explain. I didn't sit down. I let him speak while I stood by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. He talked about feeling disconnected, about wanting more passion, more energy, more excitement, as if women like me were incapable of any of those things. He said he felt stuck, weighed down by routine, by predictability, by our life. The irony was bitter enough to taste. I asked him what he wanted from me. He hesitated, then said he wanted us to try again, but with honesty. He wanted me to put in effort, to take care of myself, to understand where he was coming from, to not be so sensitive. Something cold settled in the center of my chest. Effort. As if I had spent 25 years sleeping through my own life. As if I hadn't worked full-time, cared for him through illnesses, supported his career moves, managed the household, and given every part of myself until I barely recognized my own reflection. As if loving me required too much labor from him, but loving him had been my default condition. I told him I needed space for the next few days. He didn't like that. He asked if I was being dramatic. He asked if Teresa, the coworker he barely remembered, had put ideas in my head. He asked if I was trying to punish him. I said no. But the truth was more complicated. I wasn't punishing him. I was reclaiming the parts of myself I had handed over too easily. I was stepping out of a role I had never auditioned for, but had lived in for too long. I slept on the couch that night. The cushions were lumpy, the blanket too thin, but it was the first time in years I had slept without feeling the weight of disappointment inches away from me. I woke up with a sore neck, but a clearer mind. Something inside me was brewing, a quiet current pulling me toward a life I hadn't imagined yet. At work the next day, I moved differently. Slower but more present. I noticed the way people looked at me. Not with pity, not with judgment, but with a familiarity I had never granted myself. The break room smelled like burnt coffee and microwaved leftovers. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I ate my lunch alone, but even the loneliness felt honest, as if it belonged to me rather than being imposed upon me. Around 3 p.m., I received a message from my sister, Mariah. She asked if I could come over for dinner. She lived in Newark, in the same apartment where we grew up, the one with peeling paint near the back stairwell and the faded wallpaper our mother had loved. I told her I would come after my shift. When I arrived, she hugged me longer than usual, pulling back only when she saw the exhaustion in my eyes. She asked what was wrong, and all the strength I had gathered over the last 2 days almost cracked under the weight of her concern. We sat at the small kitchen table, the same one where we had done homework as kids, and I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer quick solutions. She simply listened, her nostrils flaring the way they did when she was trying not to cry. When I finished, she took my hands in hers and said something that pierced me deeply. "You forgot who you were, Angie. But you're remembering now. That's what this is." Her words settled over me like a blanket pulled from a warm drawer. I felt seen, maybe for the first time in years. We ate dinner, rice, collard greens, and baked chicken, and I tasted the food instead of swallowing it without thought. Afterward, I sat at her window, staring at the streetlights reflecting off the hood of parked cars, thinking about the life I had built and the one I still could. When I got back to Brooklyn later that night, the apartment felt different. Not haunted, not suffocating, but temporary, as if it knew I wouldn't belong to it much longer. He was already in bed when I arrived. The light from the television cast shadows on his sleeping face, and for a moment, I watched him the way a stranger might observe someone on a train. His mouth was slightly open, his brow furrowed, his hand curled loosely on the blanket. There was nothing familiar in the sight, nothing comforting. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The sky was a deep, muted blue, and the city was still quiet. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the kitchen window. My phone buzzed with a message from him. "We should go to counseling. Maybe someone can help you understand my perspective." My perspective. My husband believed I needed professional help to understand his preference for a body I did not, and would never inhabit. I turned the phone face down on the table. The steam from the tea fogged the glass, blurring the red notification dot. Later that day, at the hospital, I was called into a small conference room for a brief staff meeting. When I walked in, a new cardiologist was speaking, Dr. Miguel Ruiz, recently transferred from Chicago. He had warm brown eyes and a calm voice that settled the room instantly. He greeted each of us individually, shaking hands, making eye contact, remembering names within minutes. When he reached me, he smiled warmly. "You're Angela, right? I've heard good things about you." I felt heat rush to my cheeks, embarrassed by how long it had been since someone acknowledged me without measuring my worth against my size. I nodded, my voice small when I answered yes. Something in his gaze lingered, not desire, not pity, but recognition. As if he could see the storm inside me even though I was trying to hold it still. Throughout the day, our paths crossed several times. He asked me questions about procedures, protocols, patient histories. Each time, he listened closely, nodding thoughtfully, taking mental notes. I found myself standing taller when speaking to him, as if my body knew it didn't have to shrink in his presence. But just as something warm flickered inside me, the world yanked me back sharply. While I was restocking supplies in room 427, my coworker Janelle approached me, her phone in hand. She hesitated before speaking. "Angela, I wasn't sure if I should show you this, but I think you need to see it." My stomach tightened. She handed me her phone. On the screen was a social media post, an image of my husband at a rooftop bar in Manhattan the night before, standing next to a young, thin woman. The same woman he had shown me, laughing, leaning into him, her hand on his chest. The caption wasn't his, but it didn't matter. Someone had tagged them both. He told me he was sleeping. He told me he wanted to fix things. He told me I was overreacting. I felt a coldness spread from my spine outward, numbing everything it touched. Janelle placed a hand on my arm, but her voice sounded distant, muffled. "Angela, I'm so sorry." I handed her phone back gently, my hands steady in a way that scared me. It wasn't the betrayal that broke me. It wasn't the lie. It wasn't even the public nature of it, the humiliation of being replaced before I was even gone. What broke me was realizing that, for the first time in my life, the pain didn't paralyze me. It cleared me. It sharpened everything. I walked to the nearest staff bathroom, shut the door, and locked it. I leaned over the sink, staring at my reflection. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, casting shadows across my face. My breathing was slow, measured, grounded. I wasn't shaking. In that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. He had already chosen his version of freedom. Now I was choosing mine. This was the first Reviravolta. The shift that didn't just hurt, it propelled me. I wasn't going back. I splashed cold water on my face and watched the droplets trace paths down my cheeks before falling into the sink. My reflection stared back at me, eyes steady, jaw clenched, shoulders squared in a way I wasn't used to seeing. For years, bathrooms had been quiet chambers of self-hatred, places where I pulled at my clothes and whispered apologies to the mirror. But in that moment, the mirror felt like a witness. Not to my humiliation, but to my turning point. I dried my face slowly and straightened my scrub top. I didn't try to fix anything. Not my hair, not the tiredness under my eyes, not the roundness of my cheeks. I just accepted what I saw. This is my face. This is my body. This is my life. And I am done letting someone else narrate it. When I walked back into the hallway, the noise of the hospital rushed over me like a wave. Monitors beeped, phones rang, carts rolled across the floors. Janelle caught my eye, worry written all over her expression. I gave her a small nod to let her know I was still standing. It was all I could offer in that moment, but it was honest. During my short break, I opened the notes app on my phone and started typing. I didn't think. I just poured. January 18th, 2024. He said he wanted someone young and thin. He took her to a rooftop bar while I thought he was asleep. I saw the picture. I don't feel broken. I feel awake. I don't know what happens next, but I know I can't stay the same. I stared at the words for a long time. I had never written about myself like that before. Not as a problem to solve or a body to fix, but as a person crossing a line they couldn't uncross. I saved the note and added another beneath it. I deserve more than being an embarrassment he hides in the dark. The words looked almost foreign, but I didn't delete them. That evening, instead of going straight home, I took the train back to Newark. When I called my sister from the platform, she didn't ask questions. She just said, "Come. I'll put water on for tea." The ride felt longer than usual, as if the distance between my past and my present had stretched during the day. Through the train window, the city blurred into streaks of light and shadow. I watched people come and go, bodies of all shapes and sizes moving through the night, existing without my permission, without my judgment. And I wondered, not for the first time, why I had never granted myself the same right. At Mariah's apartment, the hallway still smelled faintly like bleach and fried food, just like when we were kids. She opened the door before I even knocked fully. Her eyes scanned my face, and she pulled me into a hug so tight my ribs protested. "You can stay here. As long as you need," she said. Before I even took my shoes off, I sat at her small kitchen table, tracing the scratches in the wood with my fingertips. She poured me tea and waited. I told her about the rooftop picture, about the young woman, about the way he had looked at me like I was a project he'd failed and wanted to abandon. "You know he's been cruel a long time, right?" She said softly. "This isn't new. It's just louder now." Her words landed like a stone dropped into a still pond. Ripples of memory spread out. Every party where he had made jokes about my weight, every time he'd told me I let myself go, every moment he'd touched me with impatience instead of love. I had called it stress. I had called it fatigue. I had called it marriage. Maybe I had been wrong. I stayed the night on her pull-out couch. The mattress springs dug into my back, and the sheets smelled faintly of lavender detergent. I stared at the ceiling for hours, thinking about the version of myself who had walked down the aisle in a simple cream dress 25 years earlier, so certain she was being chosen. I wondered what she would say if she saw me now. Around 2 a.m., I opened my phone again and created a new note. What I want from my life that has nothing to do with him. I paused, then started a list. Peace. Health that isn't motivated by shame. Clothes that make me feel like my body deserves nice things. People who don't flinch when I sit next to them. A home where no one calls me a problem. Love that doesn't vanish when my body changes. I fell asleep before I finished the list, but it stayed open in my mind like a door. The next morning I called him. His voice was groggy, irritated. "Where are you?" "At Mariah's," I replied. He sighed dramatically. "So you're running away now?" "No," I said. "I'm stepping away so I can see clearly." Silence stretched between us. Then he said he wanted to talk face to face. He said we needed to decide what we were doing. His tone made it sound like we were business partners dissolving a contract, instead of two people ending a life together. I told him I'd come by after my shift. He agreed, then hung up without saying goodbye. At the hospital, my body moved on autopilot, but my mind felt strangely focused. Between tasks, I found myself watching other people's interactions. A man holding his wife's hand so gently as they waited for test results. A daughter fixing her father's blanket, carefully tucking it around his shoulders. A tired-looking woman with a body like mine, laughing with a nurse despite the fatigue in her eyes. It struck me how easy it had been for me to believe that love vanished the moment a body stopped fitting a particular image. But here, in these fluorescent-lit rooms, I saw proof that love could exist beyond shape, beyond youth, beyond appearances. In the late afternoon, I ran into Dr. Ruiz near the supply closet. He asked how my day was going, and I almost said fine. But something about the way he watched me made lying feel pointless. "Rough couple of days," I admitted. He nodded slowly. You don't have to tell me what's going on, but I hope you're being as kind to yourself as you are to everyone else here. It was such a simple sentence. I felt my throat tighten unexpectedly. I'm working on it, I said. Good, he replied. His gaze lingered for a moment, sincere and steady. You deserve that. The word deserve kept following me, appearing in conversations, in notes, in the quiet spaces between my thoughts. For so long, I had believed that I deserved only what was left after everyone else took what they wanted. The idea that I might deserve more, deserve kindness, respect, love that didn't have conditions attached to my waist size, felt almost rebellious. That evening, I took the train back to Brooklyn. It was Friday, January 19th, 2024. The platform was crowded with people eager to get home, or to somewhere that felt like escape. My heart pounded harder with each station we passed. I wasn't sure which version of him I would find when I walked through our door. The manipulative charmer or the dismissive critic. When I entered the apartment, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Perfume. Not mine. Something floral and sweet hanging faintly in the air like a ghost. I froze. His shoes were near the door. Another pair sat beside them, small, white sneakers with a gold stripe. My hand tightened around the strap of my bag. I walked into the living room on legs that didn't feel fully attached to me. He was there. And so was she, sitting on our couch. The young woman from the rooftop photo. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders. She wore a fitted dress that showed off the kind of body magazines called toned and effortless. When she saw me, her eyes widened briefly, then flickered with something I recognized instantly: evaluation. I thought I knew humiliation. I thought I had felt it at parties, in fitting rooms, on crowded trains. But standing in my own living room, facing my husband and the woman he had chosen as his next chapter, showed me a new level of it, a raw, exposed, unfiltered version. Angela, he said, standing awkwardly. This is Chloe. We were just talking. In our home. On the couch where I had once braided my hair while watching movies, where we had eaten takeout on lazy Sundays, where I had cried quietly after fights he didn't consider fights. Chloe smiled politely, the way someone does when meeting a co-worker, not the wife of the man they've been spending time with. Hi, she said softly. I could have screamed. I could have thrown something. I could have broken down, begged, pleaded, demanded explanations. My heart was racing, my palms damp, my throat tight enough to hurt. But I remembered something. I remembered standing in the hospital bathroom, looking at myself and promising that I wouldn't go back to being the woman who let other people define her worth. So I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I set my bag down on the dining table, took a breath so deep it reached the sorest part of my chest, and looked directly at him. You invited her here, I said. To our home. Before we even had a real conversation about us. He opened his mouth to defend himself. To spin it. To turn this into an overreaction I would eventually apologize for. But this time I didn't let him. I turned to Chloe. Did he tell you we're still married? I asked. That he sleeps in this bed? That he's been lying to my face while using my apartment as a staging area for his next life? Color rushed to her cheeks. She glanced at him, then back at me. Her voice trembled slightly when she answered. He said you two were basically done. That you didn't care anymore. That you gave up. There it was again. That phrase. Gave up. A laugh escaped me, sharp and humorless. No, I said quietly. I didn't give up. I just spent years trying to survive being slowly erased. For a moment no one spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and electric. Then I said the words that shifted the ground under all three of us. You can have him, Chloe. But understand this, you're not replacing me. You're inheriting a man who believes women are only valuable when they look a certain way. One day, if your body changes, if life gets heavy, if grief or age or circumstance softens you, he'll stand in another doorway wishing for another version of you. And he'll call that honesty too. She stared at me, eyes wide. He started to interrupt, but his words tangled in his throat, his face flushing red. I picked up my bag and headed toward the bedroom. My hands were surprisingly steady as I pulled a suitcase from the closet and began packing. Clothes, shoes, underwear, my mother's old scarf, the framed photo of me and Mariah from 10 years ago where we were laughing so hard our eyes disappeared. He came to the doorway, hovering like a shadow. So you're just walking out? He demanded. I folded a sweater and placed it gently into the suitcase. No, I said. I'm walking back to myself. He scoffed. You're being ridiculous. You think you'll just start over at 51? Who's going to want you? The cruelty should have cut me. It had always cut me before. This time, it bounced off something solid inside me. I zipped the suitcase slowly, stood up straight, and looked him dead in the eye. That's the difference between us, I said. You're terrified of not being wanted. I'm finally learning I don't have to beg to be chosen. For a second, something like fear flashed across his face. Not fear of losing me, I realized. Fear of losing the version of himself he had built through my submission. I rolled the suitcase past him, past Chloe sitting stiffly on the couch, past the memories hanging on the walls like staged scenes from a life I no longer recognized. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears, but my steps didn't falter. At the door, I paused and turned back just once. I may be fat, I said, my voice steady, but at least I'm not empty. Then I left. The cold air outside hit me like a baptism. I dragged the suitcase down the stairs, out onto the sidewalk into the night. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't check it. I walked to the corner and called a lift back to Newark. As I waited, I opened the Notes app again and typed with trembling fingers. I left. January 19th, 2024. After 25 years. He brought her to our home. I chose myself instead. When the car arrived, I got in, closed the door, and watched Brooklyn recede through the window. The city lights blurred, but my reflection in the glass looked clearer than it had in years. I didn't know what my life would look like next month or next year. I didn't know how I would rebuild. I didn't know how many nights I would cry, or how many mornings I would want to stay in bed. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done living as if my body made me unworthy of respect. And I wasn't going back. Mariah didn't say anything when she opened the door and saw the suitcase. She just stepped aside and let me in, her eyes scanning my face like she was reading a language only sisters understood. I set the suitcase down in the hallway, my legs suddenly weaker than they'd been on the sidewalk. The adrenaline that had carried me out of Brooklyn drained all at once, leaving behind a deep, bone-heavy exhaustion. "You did it," she said softly. I nodded, but the motion felt slow, delayed, like it belonged to someone else. My throat burned. My chest ached. I wanted to sit down and keep walking at the same time. She wrapped her arms around me, holding me so tightly my suitcase bumped against the wall. I let my forehead rest against her shoulder and closed my eyes. "He brought her into our home," I whispered. "Into our living room." Mariah stiffened, then pulled back just enough to look at me. "Then you leaving wasn't a choice," she said. "It was survival." Her words hit a place inside me I had kept hidden for years. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. I had spent so long trying to be reasonable, understanding, forgiving. So long making excuses for him. Standing there in my sister's hallway, suitcase at my feet, I finally called it what it was. Survival. We dragged the suitcase into the small spare room she usually used for storage. There was a twin bed pushed against the wall, covered with an old quilt our mother had sewn years before. The fabric was worn, the colors faded, but it felt like a piece of her had been waiting there for me. "You can take your time," Mariah said, leaning in the doorway. "No rush. No pressure. Just breathe." I sank onto the bed, the mattress squeaking beneath me. The room was small and cluttered, boxes stacked in the corner, a single lamp casting a soft yellow glow. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the paint with my eyes. "I should feel free," I said quietly. "But all I feel is hollow." "Freedom doesn't always come with fireworks," she replied. "Sometimes it comes with silence and shaking hands. It's still freedom." That night, I lay awake listening to the sounds of the building. The muffled TV from next door, a baby crying down the hall, the hum of the old radiator clicking on and off. My mind replayed every moment in the apartment. His words. Her presence. My own voice, calm and even, telling him I was walking back to myself. At around 3 a.m., when the shadows in the room felt heavy but not threatening, I opened my phone again. I reread the note I had written in the lift. I left. January 19th, 2024. After 25 years. He brought her to our home. I chose myself instead. For the first time since leaving, I let myself cry. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet tears, sliding down my temples and into my hairline. I cried for the woman I had been. The one who believed she needed to earn love by disappearing into herself. The next few days blurred together in a strange rhythm. Mornings at the hospital. Evenings in Newark. I commuted back and forth, carrying my life in a backpack and a suitcase half unpacked in the spare room. My body moved through routines it knew well, charting vitals, adjusting IVs, checking on patients, while my mind worked overtime trying to map a new version of my future. He sent messages. At first, they were angry. "So that's it? You're throwing away everything over one mistake?" Then they turned softer. "We've been together most of our lives, Angela. We can fix this. I'll stop seeing her. I'll focus on us." Then manipulative. "No one will love you like I have, even if you don't see it right now." I read every message. I didn't answer any of them. One night, after a particularly long shift, I sat on the train scrolling aimlessly through my phone. An ad popped up for a support group in the city. Women rebuilding after divorce and separation. Weekly meetings on Thursday nights at a community center in Manhattan. I stared at the screen for a long time, my finger hovering over the sign-up button. The idea of sitting in a circle of strangers and telling them I had stayed with a man who made me feel small for years embarrassed me. But the idea of not doing anything, of letting my life simply rearrange itself around the same patterns, scared me more. I clicked the button. On the day of the first meeting, the sky was a heavy gray, threatening snow. My shift ended at 5 p.m., and I walked the 15 minutes to the community center with my scarf pulled up to my nose and my hands shoved deep in my pockets. I almost turned around twice, but I kept walking. The room was smaller than I expected. Folding chairs arranged in a circle. A coffee urn on a plastic table in the corner. A cheap lavender air freshener attempting to cover the smell of old carpet. About 10 women were already there, coats draped over the backs of chairs, paper cups in their hands. Different ages, different backgrounds, but the same tiredness in their eyes. A woman with curly red hair and a kind face introduced herself as Lana, the facilitator. She welcomed me, asked my name, and motioned for me to sit wherever I felt comfortable. I chose a chair near the back of the circle, close to the door, just in case I needed to escape. We started with introductions. One by one, the women shared brief versions of their stories. Infidelity, control, emotional neglect. Some had kids. Some didn't. Some had left. Some were still trying to decide. When it was my turn, my mouth went dry. My name is Angela, I said. I've been married for 25 years. I left last week. Lana nodded encouragingly. What made you leave? I hesitated, my fingers curling around the edge of my chair. He told me he wanted someone young and thin, I said. That he was tired of being seen next to a fat woman. Then he brought another woman to our home. To our couch. Several women exhaled sharply. One of them whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. How did that make you feel? Lana asked gently. I thought I would feel destroyed, I replied. But instead I felt like it was finally undeniable. Like he'd taken everything he'd hinted at for years and put it in the center of the room. There was no way to pretend after that. Lana nodded again. Sometimes clarity hurts more than confusion. But it also gives us a direction. As the meeting went on, I listened to other women talk about their journeys. The fear. The loneliness. The way they had questioned their worth because of someone else's choices. I felt less alone, but not only that. I felt something else I hadn't expected. I felt angry. Not just at him. At the world that had helped me believe that a woman like me should be grateful for any attention at all. That my size made me lucky to have anyone, even someone who treated me like a failure. On my way back to Newark that night, I caught my reflection in the dark subway window. The same round face, the same graying curls, the same full body. But the way I was looking at myself had changed. My eyes were sharper. Less apologetic. At Mariah's, she asked how the meeting went. I told her about the women, about their stories, about the way my chest had tightened when I recognized pieces of myself in them. You're building a new life, she said. Brick by brick. It's not going to look finished for a long time. That's okay. A few days later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Mariah convinced me to do something I had always avoided. Let me take a picture of you, she said. Absolutely not, I replied. I hadn't willingly been in a photo alone for years. Come on, Angie, she insisted. Not for him, not for anyone else. For you. For now. So you can look back and see where you started. We argued gently, sister to sister, until finally I gave in. I put on a simple black dress and a soft cardigan. I stood near the window where the light was kindest. Mariah told me to relax my shoulders, to tilt my chin up just a little, to breathe. When she showed me the picture, my first instinct was to search for flaws. The curve of my stomach, the softness of my arms, the fullness of my face. But something stopped me. My eyes. They looked alive. I made her send me the photo. That night, lying in the narrow bed in the spare room, I opened it again and stared at it for a long time. Then, on an impulse that made my palms sweat, I opened an old social media account I hadn't used in years. I hadn't posted anything since 2017, when a cousin had uploaded a group photo from a barbecue and someone had commented, "Dang, Angie's really let herself go." The comment had gotten likes. Laughing emojis. I had deleted the app the next day. But the account was still there, waiting. I uploaded the new photo. My heart hammered against my ribs as I typed. 51. Newly separated. Fat, black, and still here. For a long time, I believed my body made me unlovable. But I left a man who treated me like a burden. This is not a before picture. This is me right now choosing myself. My finger hovered over the post button. I almost backed out. Almost saved it as a draft and hid it forever. Then I hit share. I locked my phone and set it face down on the nightstand, my pulse racing. The room felt too quiet, the air too thick. I got up, paced, sat down, stood up again. Every worst-case scenario flashed through my mind. Mocking comments. Silence. Pity. When I finally picked up the phone again, there were already a few notifications. Likes. A comment from Mariah. My sister is beautiful. Always has been. Another from a coworker I hadn't spoken to in months. Proud of you, Angela. Nothing cruel. Not yet. I exhaled slowly, tension easing from my shoulders. Over the next few days, something strange happened. The post didn't go viral. Not in the way people imagine when they talk about the internet blowing up. But it traveled. Friends shared it. Their friends shared it. Women I didn't know started following me, sending messages about how they felt seen, how they were in their 40s or 50s or 60s, and had also believed their bodies made them unworthy of love. I wasn't an influencer. I wasn't polished. I wasn't posting diet tips or before and after shots. I just told the truth about one moment in my life, and that truth resonated more than I ever expected. One evening, after a long day at the hospital, I sat on the bed scrolling through messages. A woman from Texas wrote, "I'm 49, fat, and my husband constantly tells me he misses the old me. Reading your words made me feel less crazy. Thank you." Another from a woman in Brazil. "I left after 20 years. Your story feels like mine." I sat there with the phone in my hand, the sheets cool against my legs, and realized something important. I wasn't just surviving my story. I was starting to own it. A week after I posted the photo, I got a message I didn't expect. It was from an account I recognized immediately. "My husband. So now you're playing victim for the internet?" He wrote, "Posting about being fat and still here like I abused you? You're embarrassing yourself." My stomach clenched, but not with the old shame. With anger. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. For years, I had let him script the narrative. I had let him decide what was too much, too loud, too dramatic. But not this time. I didn't respond privately. I went to my post, took a deep breath, and typed a new caption below it. Someone asked if I'm embarrassed to call myself fat. I'm not. I'm embarrassed I stayed with a man who thought my worth ended at my waistline. To any woman reading this who has been made to feel like a burden because of her body, you are not the problem. His gaze is. I hit post. My hands were shaking. Within minutes, more notifications rolled in. Hearts. Comments. Women echoing the same pain. That night, lying in the dark, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration humming under my skin. I had spent a lifetime being the quiet, accommodating one. The one who laughed off insults. The one who tried to become smaller, physically and emotionally, to keep the peace. Now, for the first time, my voice was louder than his. And the world was listening. A few days later, I woke before my alarm, the faint light of dawn filtering through the thin curtains in Mariah's spare room. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then the ache in my chest reminded me. Not heartbreak exactly, more like a bruise you press without meaning to. I sat up slowly, stretching my back, listening to the radiator hum and click. The apartment was quiet except for the soft shuffle of Mariah making coffee in the kitchen. When I walked out, she glanced at me over her mug. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" I shook my head. She slid a cup toward me, steam curling upward like a slow exhale. I held it between my palms, grateful for the warmth. She hesitated before speaking, the way people do when they're afraid to push too hard. "Have you thought about next steps?" The question sat between us like something fragile. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "It's like, my life cracked open, and I'm still looking at the pieces." She nodded, not pressuring me. "That's okay. Pieces can become something new." On the train to the hospital, I checked my phone. More notifications. Messages from women who had seen my post. A few from coworkers offering support. And then one that made my stomach flip. A message from Dr. Ruiz. "Saw your post. It was brave. Hope you're taking care of yourself." Just one simple sentence, but it landed differently. It didn't feel like pity. It felt like acknowledgement. I typed a short reply thanking him, then slipped my phone into my bag before I could overthink it. The day at work was busy, a steady stream of patients, tests, and charts. It felt almost grounding, the predictable rhythm of care. But during my lunch break, as I sat in the cafeteria stirring a cup of soup I wasn't really hungry for, a familiar voice approached. "Mind if I sit?" It was him, Dr. Ruiz. I gestured to the empty chair across from me. He sat, resting his forearms on the table, his posture relaxed, his presence warm without being intrusive. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. I hesitated. Habit tugged at me, urging me to say fine, to gloss over the messiness. But I was tired of minimizing my own life. "Some days I feel strong," I said. "Other days, I feel like I made a mistake leaving." "You didn't make a mistake," he replied immediately, as if the idea itself was absurd. "You made a choice that took courage." Courage. I wasn't used to being described that way. We talked for most of my break. Not about my husband, not directly, but about resilience, identity, the weight women carry that no one sees. He spoke with sincerity, not offering solutions, only presence. When he left to return to his rounds, he smiled at me in a way that warmed the air around us. "If you ever need someone to talk to," he said, "you know where to find me." It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't pressure. It was something I hadn't felt in a long time. Kindness without agenda. That evening, back in Newark, Mariah and I ate dinner on the couch, plates balanced on our knees, an old sitcom playing softly in the background. Partway through the episode, my phone buzzed. I checked the screen expecting another message from a woman online. But it was him. My husband. His words were frantic, disjointed. "We need to talk. Things are getting out of hand. People are messaging me. Take the post down." I felt a cold rush of disbelief. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about his reputation. About the version of himself he curated for the world. I didn't answer. I put the phone face down on my thigh and took another bite of my food. He wrote again. I'll make this right. Just stop embarrassing me. Mariah saw the look on my face and grabbed the phone gently from my hands before I threw it across the room. He's spiraling, she said. Let him. But his messages kept coming. Long paragraphs, short bursts, voice memos I didn't dare listen to. I muted the thread. The silence that followed felt like a soft blanket thrown over a fire. Later that night, after Mariah went to bed, I sat alone in the dim living room, scrolling through the comments on my post. One stood out. You don't realize it yet, but this is your rebirth. I read the line several times. Rebirth. It felt too dramatic, too poetic. But something inside me stirred at the idea. Maybe not rebirth exactly, but emergence. Like stepping out of a dimly lit room and squinting into the sun. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing continuously. At first, I thought something was wrong at the hospital. But when I picked it up, I saw dozens of notifications, not from women this time, but from strangers. My post had been shared by someone with a large following. Comments were pouring in. Encouragement, solidarity, anger on my behalf. And inevitably cruelty too. Some comments read, "You're beautiful. Don't let him define you. Women deserve better than this. Proud of you." Others were harsher, aimed at my body at my age. Of course he left. Look at her. Should have taken care of yourself. This is why men cheat. I felt the sting, sharp and immediate. No matter how prepared I thought I was, the words burrowed under my skin. It was strange, so many messages of support, yet my eyes jumped straight to the cruelty, as if trained to absorb only the attacks. Despite myself, tears pooled behind my eyelids. I blinked them away, inhaling slowly. I reminded myself that strangers didn't know me, didn't know my story, didn't own the right to make judgments about my value. But wounds don't care about logic. A soft knock came at the doorframe. Mariah leaned in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed me one, then sat beside me, her thigh pressed gently against mine. Bad comments? She asked softly. A few. She took the phone, scrolled, and shook her head. People project their own misery. They see a woman who left something toxic, and it threatens their narrative. Don't carry their poison. I nodded, but the ache remained. She squeezed my hand. Listen, Angie. You are allowed to be hurt. But don't forget, you are also healing. Later that day, after my shift, I walked into the sunlit atrium near the hospital entrance and saw a familiar figure waiting near the vending machines. Dr. Ruiz. He straightened when he saw me, a warm smile blooming on his face. Thought you might like some company on the way out, he said. I wasn't used to being considered in that way, gently, thoughtfully. We walked to the subway together, the air crisp against our faces. Somewhere between the hospital doors and the station entrance, he asked the question I had been avoiding. Do you feel safe at home? I stopped walking. The question hung between us, weighty and sincere. Yes, I said after a moment. I'm safe, but I'm not settled. He nodded as if he understood the difference perfectly. If you ever need anything, help moving, someone to talk to, someone to walk with, just ask. I thanked him, my voice catching slightly. His kindness felt dangerous in a way I didn't want to examine yet. Not romantic, not suggestive, just human connection. And sometimes that's more overwhelming than desire. As the train pulled in, he touched my arm lightly, a gesture so small I almost missed it. Take care of yourself, Angela. You deserve a life that expands you, not shrinks you. That night in Newark, those words echoed through me. Expand, not shrink. For years, my body had been framed as a problem, a burden, a limitation. The idea that I could expand, emotionally, spiritually, socially, felt radical. In the quiet of the spare room, I opened my social media again. I scrolled past the supportive comments, the hateful ones, the ones that simply said following for updates. Then, without fully understanding why, I posted again. I am not trying to get smaller to fit someone's idea of love. I am learning how to grow into my own. I set the phone aside and turned off the lamp. In the darkness, I felt something unfamiliar settle into me. Not peace, not joy, but direction. A quiet, steady pull toward a future I hadn't dared imagine. And although I couldn't see the shape of that future yet, I could feel it forming. Expanding, becoming real. The following weeks unfolded slowly, like my life was stretching in unfamiliar directions. Each morning I woke before sunrise, wrapped myself in my coat, and took the train into the city, the windows fogging with the breath of dozens of strangers. I watched their reflections, tired eyes, blank expressions, people clutching bags and coffee cups like lifelines. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible among them. I felt like someone in transition, someone thawing after a long winter. At the hospital, I found myself noticing small things I had ignored before. The way sunlight spilled across the linoleum floor near the East Wing around 10 a.m. The softness in the voice of a young resident when she explained a diagnosis to a worried family. The way patients sometimes squeezed my hand a second longer than necessary, grateful for warmth more than words. For years, I had moved through my shifts with my head down, trying not to attract attention. Now I walked with my shoulders slightly straighter, not out of pride but out of a quiet refusal to fold myself so tightly anymore. One afternoon, while I was checking supplies in the medication room, my phone vibrated. A message popped up from an unknown number. "It's me. We need to finalize what you're doing. You can't just disappear." His tone hadn't changed. Still directive. Still assuming ownership. Still believing I owed him clarity, while he had never given me the same. I didn't respond. I turned the phone off completely and returned to organizing the shelves, the sterile smell grounding me. When I turned around, Dr. Ruiz was standing in the doorway holding a chart. His expression softened when he saw my face. "Everything okay?" I nodded, even though the pressure in my chest was expanding. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't have to pretend with me." The kindness in his tone nearly unspooled me. I swallowed hard and adjusted a box of gloves on the shelf. "Just sorting things out," I said. "If sorting ever becomes too heavy to carry alone," he replied, "you know where I am." Something in me warmed. Not romantically, not yet, but with the recognition of safety. I had forgotten what that felt like. That night, back at Mariah's, I found her folding laundry in the living room, the glow of the lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. She asked how my day was. I told her it was long but manageable. Then she paused, looking at me with a seriousness that made me set my bag down carefully. "Your husband messaged me earlier." My heart stopped for a beat. "What did he say?" "He wanted to know if you were planning to file for anything. He said he deserved closure." The word deserved sparked something sharp inside me. "I'm the one who deserves closure," I muttered. Mariah nodded. "He's panicking because he's losing control. That's all it is." I sat on the couch, the cushion sinking softly beneath my weight. My hands trembled slightly in my lap. "I don't know what I'm doing yet," I admitted. "I don't know if I'm ready to make everything official." "You don't have to decide tonight," she said. "But don't let fear make the decision for you." We watched an old reality show rerun without really paying attention, the screen flickering across our faces. Later, in the spare room, I opened my phone again. My second post had gathered hundreds of comments, some cruel, most compassionate. One message, from a woman named Evelyn, stood out. "You are teaching all of us something. Not how to be perfect. How to be honest." I reread that line several times. Honest. I had spent years hiding my pain behind silence. Now honesty felt like oxygen. The next week, as January settled into its final days, something shifted in a way I couldn't ignore. It happened in small increments. Every morning I looked in the mirror and saw a face less weighed down by fear. My clothes fit the same, my body the same shape, my life still chaotic and uncertain. But my presence had changed. My energy felt different, as if I were expanding into myself instead of shrinking from the world. One Thursday evening, I attended the support group again. The cold outside bit at my cheeks, but inside the room it was warm, the chairs arranged in their familiar circle. Lana welcomed me with a hug. The other women smiled, recognizing me. We shared updates. One woman had finally set boundaries with her husband. Another had moved into her own apartment. Their progress felt like fuel for my own resolve. When it was my turn to speak, I felt something uncoil in my chest. "I think I'm starting to see myself without him," I said. And I didn't realize how much of me he had taken until I stepped away. The women nodded, eyes soft. "That's the hardest part," Lana said. "Seeing the empty spaces. Then deciding what you want to fill them with." After the meeting, I lingered near the doorway, hugging my coat to my chest. Snow had begun to fall outside, fat flakes drifting lazily under the street lamps. As I stepped out, the cold pressed against my skin, sharp but clean. The air felt new. The train ride back to Newark was quiet. I sat near the window, watching the snow streak past like brief sparks of white. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out reluctantly, expecting his name. Instead, it was a new message from someone with a profile photo of an older woman smiling gently. "My daughter showed me your post. I'm 62. My husband left me last year after saying he wanted someone lighter. I want you to know, you helped me get out of bed today. Thank you." I pressed my hand over my mouth, overwhelmed. Not by sadness. By connection. By the realization that my story, messy and unfinished, had reached someone who needed it. When I arrived at Mariah's apartment, she was already half asleep on the couch. She stirred when I closed the door softly. "Long day," she mumbled. "A meaningful one," I whispered back. The next morning, I checked my email during breakfast and saw something unexpected. A message from a local women's health organization. They had seen my post. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to speak at an upcoming event about body acceptance and emotional resilience. It was small, informal, nothing polished. But they wanted me. Me. 51, fat, recently separated, living in my sister's spare room, rebuilding from the ground up. I closed the email slowly, my heart thudding. Mariah looked at me over her toast. "What happened?" she asked. I handed her my phone. She read the message, then grinned so wide I could see the gap between her front teeth. "Angie, They want your voice. I felt the sting of tears behind my eyes, but this time they didn't come from pain. I don't know if I can do it, I whispered. What would I even say? Say the truth, she replied. Say what you wrote in your posts. Say what you've lived. Say what you wish someone had said to you when you were disappearing inside that marriage. I looked back at the email. For the first time in a long time, I felt possibility blooming in my chest. That evening, as I walked from the train station to Mariah's building, the sky was painted in shades of deep pink and soft gold. My breath formed clouds in front of me. A small group of kids were throwing snowballs near the playground, their laughter echoing in the cold air. My phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen. I hesitated, then answered. His voice was a mix of desperation and indignation. I need to know what you're planning, he said. Are you coming back or not? I can't keep living like this, Angela. I need answers. For a moment, I looked up at the dimly glowing windows of the surrounding buildings, each one holding a life I wasn't part of. Then I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. I'm not coming back, I said. My voice didn't tremble this time. He inhaled sharply. You're throwing away everything we built. No, I replied. I'm throwing away the version of myself who accepted being treated like a burden. He started to argue, but I ended the call gently without anger. I slid the phone into my pocket. The night air felt cool against my face, almost like a hand smoothing over my skin. When I reached Mariah's apartment, I paused outside the door for a moment. My chest felt lighter. My steps steadier. Inside, warmth wrapped around me like a soft blanket. I hung my coat and looked around at the modest living room, the cluttered shelves, the faint smell of lavender detergent. For the first time, it didn't feel temporary. It felt like the beginning of something. Something real. Something mine. A few weeks later, February had settled over the city like a heavy gray blanket. The days were short, the streets slushy, everyone moving faster to escape the cold. My life had found a rough rhythm. Work, train, Mariah's apartment, group meetings, quiet evenings with my phone lighting up from messages I never expected to receive. But that email from the Women's Health Organization sat in the back of my mind like a small, insistent drumbeat. One night after dinner, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the email highlighted on the screen. Mariah rinsed dishes at the sink, humming softly to some old R&B song drifting from her phone. The smell of garlic and onions still lingered in the air. You're staring at that email like it's going to bite you, she said over her shoulder. It might, I replied. She dried her hands and sat opposite me, folding her arms on the table. What are you afraid of? I sighed. My reflection stared back faintly from the laptop screen. I'm afraid I'll get up there and forget how to talk. I'm afraid I'll look ridiculous. I'm afraid they only want me because I'm a story, not a person. You're both, she said simply. A story and a person. That's the point. I scrolled up and down the email again, rereading the details. The event would be at a small community space in Manhattan on March 10th. A panel of women sharing their experiences with body image, aging, relationships, and health. Nothing fancy. No TV cameras. Just people. Still, my chest felt tight. I don't have anything that important to say, I murmured. Mariah raised an eyebrow. You walked away from a man who tried to convince you your body made you disposable, and you're rebuilding your life at 51. You've got plenty to say. Silence stretched for a few seconds. The refrigerator hummed. A car horn blared outside, then faded. I clicked reply. My fingers hovered over the keys for a moment. Then I typed. Thank you for reaching out. Yes, I'd be honored to participate. I hit send before I could change my mind. My pulse thudded in my ears. When the email swooshed away, Mariah grinned and clapped her hands once. There she is, she said. That's my sister. The weeks leading up to the event were a strange mix of ordinary and extraordinary. On the surface, nothing dramatic changed. I still shared a cramped apartment with my sister. I still took the same trains, wore the same scrubs, clocked in at the same hospital. But inside, everything felt like it was slowly rearranging itself. At night, after Mariah went to bed, I sat at the small desk in the spare room and tried to write what I wanted to say. The blank page stared back at me, accusing and silent. I started and stopped dozens of times. Hi, my name is Angela and I'm fat. Delete. My marriage ended when my husband decided my body was a problem. Delete. What do you say when your entire life has been one long compromise with shame? Delete. The words felt either too sharp or too dull, never right. One night, frustrated, I shut the laptop and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. What would you have wanted to hear 10 years ago? I asked myself. The answer came slowly, like a memory surfacing from deep water. I would have wanted someone to tell me that the voice calling me disgusting wasn't mine, that it belonged to a world that profited from my self-hate, that I didn't have to keep repeating it to myself. I sat up and opened the laptop again. This time, the words flowed differently. At the hospital, my days were still long, but they felt less heavy. I noticed that I laughed more with coworkers, that I made eye contact more often, that when patients called me dear or sweetheart, it no longer stung the way it used to. I existed in my body with a little less apology each day. One afternoon, I was restocking the linen cart when I heard footsteps behind me. "You look lighter," Dr. Ruiz said. I turned, confused. "I haven't lost weight," I said automatically, the old defensiveness rising before I could stop it. He smiled gently. "That's not what I meant. I mean here." He tapped his chest with 2 fingers. I felt my face flush. I looked away, pretending to adjust the blankets. "I'm working on it," I said. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," he replied. "It suits you." The warmth his words sparked in me stayed with me all day. Not because a man was saying something kind, but because for once it wasn't tied to how closely my body matched some ideal. It was about my presence, my energy, myself. A few days later, on a Sunday, Mariah insisted we go shopping. "You can't show up at this event in the same old stuff," she said, hands on her hips. "You need something that feels like your new life." We took the train to a plus-size boutique in Manhattan, a place I had always been too intimidated to enter alone. The mannequins in the window wore bold colors, structured dresses, wide-legged pants, clothes designed for bodies like mine rather than trying to hide them. Inside, I felt awkward at first, like I was trespassing. But the sales associate greeted us with a bright smile and zero judgment. She brought clothes in my size without flinching, without that pitying look I'd grown used to over the years. We selected a deep emerald green dress that hugged my curves gently without clinging too tight. The sleeves came to my elbows, the neckline modest but flattering. When I stepped out of the fitting room, Mariah gasped. "Oh my God," she said. "Look at you." I turned slowly toward the mirror. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman looking back. She stood tall. Her stomach was visible, yes. Her arms full, her hips wide. But the color lit up her skin. The shape honored her body instead of apologizing for it. My body. Me. I lifted a hand to my face, tracing the line of my jaw, the gray at my temples. "I look like I'm not hiding," I murmured. "You're not," Mariah said. "You're showing up." I bought the dress. It was more expensive than anything I'd bought for myself in years, but when I handed over my card, I didn't feel guilty. I felt invested. In myself. The night of the event came quicker than I expected. March 10th, 2024. The air was still cold, but with hints of spring hiding somewhere beneath the chill. I stood in the bathroom at the community center, palms planted on the edge of the sink, staring at my reflection. The emerald dress. Simple gold earrings. Light makeup. My curls pulled back loosely, the silver at my temples visible instead of hidden. My heart raced. My legs shook. My mouth felt dry. I thought of my husband's words. "I want someone young and thin." I thought of the younger woman on our couch. I thought of all the comments online, both kind and cruel. I thought of the women in my DMs, the support group, the patients who had unknowingly shown me what tenderness looked like. And then I thought of the girl I used to be. The one who tugged at her clothes in high school, who avoided pool parties, who laughed along when boys made jokes about fat girls so they wouldn't see how much it hurt. I met my own eyes in the mirror and whispered, "You're allowed to be seen." When I stepped into the small auditorium, the room was already half full. Folding chairs in neat rows. A makeshift stage at the front. A banner on the wall reading, "Women in Our Bodies. Stories of Resilience." 3 other women sat on the stage, chatting quietly. I recognized one from social media, a yoga instructor in her 40s who talked about movement for joy, not punishment. Another was a therapist. The third was a breast cancer survivor who had written a book about life after surgery. I took my seat, my hands twisting in my lap. The murmur of the crowd buzzed around me. As my eyes scanned the room, they landed on a familiar face near the back. Dr. Ruiz. He sat in the last row, jacket folded over his lap, watching me with quiet encouragement. When our eyes met, he gave me a small nod. It was such a subtle gesture, but it steadied me more than I wanted to admit. The moderator introduced us one by one. When she said my name, there was polite applause. I stood, smiling nervously, then sat again, palms damp. We each had 15 minutes to speak. The yoga instructor went first, her voice warm and grounded as she talked about reclaiming movement after years of hating her body. The therapist spoke about how diet culture wrung money out of women's insecurities. The cancer survivor talked about grief and gratitude, about learning to see her scar as part of her story, not the end of it. Then it was my turn. I stood, my legs trembling slightly as I walked to the podium. The microphone hissed softly when I adjusted it. For a moment, my mind went blank. The audience blurred into a single mass of faces. I took a slow breath. "My name is Angela," I said. "I'm 51. I'm a nurse. I'm black. I'm fat. And I left a 25-year marriage because my husband told me he wanted someone young and thin." A ripple moved through the crowd. Some people shifted in their seats. A few women nodded, their eyes already glistening. For years, I continued, I thought my body made me lucky to have anyone at all. So when he made comments about my weight, I told myself it was concern. When he stopped touching me, I told myself it was stress. When he introduced me to friends as his wife with a tone that sounded more like apology than pride, I told myself I was imagining it. My throat tightened. I paused, pressing my fingertips into the edges of the podium. Then one night, in our kitchen, he said it plainly. That he wanted someone young and thin. That he was tired of being seen next to a woman like me. And my first reaction wasn't anger. It was shame. For a moment, I thought the audience might shrink away. Instead, they leaned in. Shame because I believed him, I said. Because somewhere along the way, I had absorbed the message that my body was a problem to be solved, not a home I lived in. That I should be grateful for crumbs. I told them about the rooftop photo. About Chloe on our couch. About the suitcase bumping down the stairs. About moving in with my sister. About writing that first note on my phone and posting that photo online. I told them, my voice steadying with each sentence, that I used to think leaving would be the end of me. Instead, it was the first time I'd ever chosen myself. I looked out at the faces in front of me, women of all ages and sizes and backgrounds. Some were crying. Some were staring at me with a kind of fierce pride that made my chest ache. I used to believe that if I wasn't young and thin, I was on the wrong side of the line, I said. That love, respect, desire, joy were things I had to earn by fighting my own body. But I've learned something I wish I had known 30 years ago. I paused, feeling the weight of the moment settle over the room. My body is not late. My life is not over. And if someone looks at me and sees a burden instead of a blessing, that says everything about their emptiness and nothing about my worth. A quiet murmur of agreement spread through the seats. A few people clapped softly. I ended by talking about the messages I'd received. The women in their 40s, 50s, 60s who felt invisible. The daughters worried about their mothers. The mothers worried about their daughters. I told them I wasn't a success story yet. I was in the middle. I was still scared. Still figuring it out. But I was not small anymore. When I walked back to my chair, my knees felt weak. The room erupted into applause, louder than I expected, warm and sustained. I sat down, exhaling shakily, my hands trembling in my lap. On the train back to Newark that night, still wearing the emerald dress under my coat, I checked my phone. Someone had recorded a portion of my talk and tagged me. It wasn't perfect. My voice wobbled in places. I fidgeted with the hem of my sleeve. But I looked alive. There was a comment already under the video. She said, "My body is not late. My life is not over." I felt that in my bones. For the first time in a long time, as the train rumbled under the city, I smiled without feeling like I had to hide it. I had told my story out loud, and I hadn't disappeared. A few days after the event, something in the air around me felt different, even before anything actually changed. It was subtle at first, coworkers lingering a little longer in conversation, strangers meeting my eyes instead of looking past me, women from the support group texting just to check in. It was like speaking my truth out loud had altered my gravity, pulling different kinds of people toward me and pushing others away. I didn't hear from my husband for nearly a week. Not a message, not a call. The silence felt strange, too quiet after months of his frantic attempts to regain control. Part of me wondered if Chloe was still in the picture, if he had moved on fully, if he had told himself a version of the story where he was the victim and I was unreasonable. I didn't miss him. I missed the version of myself who once believed she was loved, even if that belief had been built on illusions. One afternoon in late March, I stepped into the staff elevator at the hospital, exhausted from a back-to-back shift. Just as the doors were closing, a hand reached in to stop them. Dr. Ruiz slipped inside, offering me a warm smile as he caught his breath. "Rough day?" he asked. "It's been a long one," I replied, leaning my head back against the cool metal wall. He stood beside me, close but not too close, the faint scent of cedar and laundry soap drifting from him. When the elevator doors opened on our floor, he didn't step out right away. Instead, he turned to me with a curious expression. "I watched your talk," he said softly. "Someone sent me the video." My stomach fluttered unexpectedly. "Oh God," I murmured. "I ramble when I'm nervous." He shook his head. "No, you were powerful. And honest in a way most people are afraid to be." He crept up my neck. I looked down at the floor, pretending to straighten the badge clipped to my scrub top. "Thank you," I whispered. He held my gaze for a moment longer, his eyes soft and knowing, before excusing himself to check on a patient. But that moment stayed with me all day. It wasn't the attention that moved me. It was the respect. That evening, back in Newark, Mariah was waiting for me with a grin so wide it bordered on suspicious. She held out her phone like a trophy. "Look what just came through," she said. I took the phone from her cautiously and read the screen. It was a message request from a journalist at a digital magazine. Nothing huge, but popular enough to have reach. She wanted to interview me about my story, my talk, my social media posts, the response from women across different age groups. My throat tightened. "Me?" I asked. "Why?" Mariah scoffed. "Why not? You're saying the things women are dying to hear someone say." I sank onto the couch, staring at the message. My instinct was to decline. Who was I to speak for anyone? I wasn't healed or enlightened. I was still taking the train back and forth between a borrowed bedroom and a job that drained me. I was still navigating loneliness and fear, and the ache of rebuilding from rubble. But maybe that was the point. I typed a reply agreeing to talk. The interview was scheduled for the following week, over Zoom. On the day of, I brushed out my curls, put on a clean blouse, and set Mariah's lamp behind the laptop so the lighting wouldn't make me look washed out. My hands trembled as I waited for the journalist to join the call. When her face appeared on screen, she smiled warmly. "Thank you so much for doing this, Angela. Your story resonated with thousands." Thousands. The word felt unreal. The interview started slowly. She asked about the early years of my marriage, what I believed back then, the moments I overlooked, the quiet erosion of self-esteem that happens so gradually you don't see it until you're standing in the ruins. I spoke carefully at first, measured, afraid of sounding bitter. But the more we talked, the more I realized bitterness wasn't what filled me anymore. "What fills you now?" she asked toward the end, leaning forward in her chair. I paused, searching for the truth behind the first words that came to mind. "Space," I said finally. "Space to breathe. Space to exist without bending. Space to take up room in my own life again." She nodded, her expression soft. "That's beautiful." After we ended the call, I sat for a long time staring at the blank screen. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from a sense of something shifting in real time. That article changed everything. It was published 2 days later. A photo of me from the event, mid-sentence, dressed brilliant under the lighting, accompanied the headline. She left after 25 years when her husband said she was too fat. Now she's rewriting her life at 51. Thousands of comments. Shares. Messages. Not all kind, of course. There were always people eager to weaponize a woman's body against her. But the overwhelming response was supportive. Women wrote things like, "I needed this today. I didn't know I was allowed to want more. Thank you for giving us courage by being yourself." Messages came from countries I had never been to. Ages ranging from teens to women in their 70s. Some were married, some divorced, some single, some never loved at all. But they all understood something about my story because pieces of it lived inside them too. The article brought invitations. Podcasts. Community events. A small body positivity group in Queens asked me to speak. A church in Harlem invited me to a workshop. I wasn't sure I was qualified, but I said yes anyway. Meanwhile, my husband finally broke the silence. One night, just after 9 p.m., my phone lit up with a call from him. I stared at it for a long time before answering. When I did, his voice was tight, strained, brittle. "You've embarrassed me publicly," he snapped. "You're making me look like some kind of monster." "You made your own choices," I said calmly. "You twisted everything," he insisted. "People think I abused you." My fingers curled into my palm. I could feel my pulse in my throat. "You didn't abuse me," I said quietly. "You just didn't love me. That's what hurt the most." Silence stretched. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't supposed to end like this. I closed my eyes, letting that land. For years, I would have absorbed that sentence like a command, a responsibility to fix something broken. But now, finally, it felt like a statement about his own disappointment, not mine. "Maybe not," I said. But it ended the way it needed to. He asked me if we could at least meet. Talk. Find some middle ground. But the version of myself who would have agreed out of habit or guilt was gone. "I can't," I said. "Not now. Maybe not ever." He whispered something I couldn't quite catch before the line went silent. I hung up gently, not angry, just done. The next morning, when I arrived at work, Dr. Ruiz caught me in the hallway. He eyed me with quiet concern. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. Something in my soul had settled overnight. A final thread cut. A final door closed. Later that week, I was restocking a cabinet when a patient's daughter approached me. She was tall, mid-30s, wearing a puffy jacket with faux fur around the hood. "Are you Angela Brooks?" she asked. I braced myself. "Yes." She broke into a smile. "I recognized you from the article. I just wanted to say thank you. For speaking up. For being brave. My mother is plus size, and she spent her whole life apologizing for it. You gave her, I don't know, permission to breathe, I guess." My chest tightened. Permission to breathe. The phrase rooted itself in me. That night, on the walk from the train to Mariah's building, I felt something unfamiliar rise inside me. Not pride exactly, but alignment. As if my life, twisted and bent for decades to fit someone else's idea of acceptable, was finally straightening into its true shape. In early April, the women's organization emailed me again. They were hosting a full-day conference in the summer, and they wanted me to be a keynote speaker. A 50-minute talk in front of a few hundred attendees. I read the email twice, heart pounding. Mariah squealed when she saw my face. "This is big, Angie. This is you stepping into something you were never allowed to imagine." I laughed, overwhelmed. "I'm just a woman who left a bad marriage." "No," she said firmly. "You're a woman who found herself when most people think it's too late." That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and felt tears slide into my hair. Not grief. Not shame. Something closer to awe. My life, my story, my voice, was becoming something bigger than what broke me. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. Because one afternoon, during a quiet moment between patient rounds, I checked my phone and found a message request from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Chloe. The other woman. The message preview read, "Angela, can we talk? Please. I need to tell you something." When I opened it, my pulse hammered so hard I had to sit down. "I'm so sorry," she wrote. "I didn't know the truth. I didn't know what he told me about you wasn't real. I need to tell you what really happened, and what he's been saying now." My breath caught. My life was about to shift again. And not in a small way. When I opened Chloe's message, the room around me seemed to tilt. I sat down on the edge of a supply cart, my hands going cold even though the air in the hallway was warm. For a moment, all I could do was stare at her words. I didn't know what she wanted to tell me. I didn't know if I should even care. But my chest tightened with something sharper than curiosity. It felt like the last knot of my old life tugging at me. I typed slowly, my fingertips trembling slightly. "What do you need to tell me?" She replied almost instantly, as if she had been waiting with the phone in her hands. "Please, can we talk in person? I don't feel right sending this in messages." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to say no, to protect the space I had fought so hard to reclaim. But something in her tone, not guilt, not entitlement, but urgency, made me pause. I gave her a time and a place. A small cafe in Manhattan near the hospital, neutral ground. She agreed without hesitation. I couldn't focus the rest of that shift. My mind kept replaying his voice, his accusations, the look on his face when I walked out of our apartment with a suitcase. I thought I had closed that chapter, sealed it. But now, with Chloe stepping into the story again, it felt like a shadow rising behind me. At the cafe, I arrived early and chose a table near the window. I wrapped my hands around a mug of tea, letting the warmth settle my breath. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, her eyes swollen from crying, her shoulders hunched in a way I hadn't seen the night she sat on my couch. She approached the table tentatively. "Angela?" she asked, her voice small. I nodded, motioning for her to sit. She slid into the seat across from me, gripping the edge of the table as if steadying herself. "Thank you for meeting me," she whispered. "What do you need to say?" I asked quietly. She took a shaky breath. "At first, I believed everything he told me about you." Her eyes filled with tears. "He said you didn't care about him, that you belittled him, that you stopped trying, that he felt alone in your marriage. He presented himself as a victim. Someone trapped. Someone craving affection." The familiar sting rose in my chest, but I stayed silent. "He told me he wasn't attracted to you anymore because you'd given up on yourself," she continued. "That he'd tried everything. That you wouldn't listen. He made it sound like he was escaping a prison." My stomach tightened. "I'm not proud of it," she whispered. I didn't question him. I didn't look closer. I didn't think about the fact that if someone was willing to betray their partner with me, they'd eventually betray me too. And then she looked directly into my eyes. "He's lying to people about you now. Worse than before." My heart thumped painfully. "What is he saying?" She swallowed hard. "He's telling people you cheated on him. That you stole money from him when you left. That you're unstable. That you're using social media to ruin his life out of spite." The shock hit me like a punch to the chest. My breath caught. I had expected cruelty, defensiveness, maybe even resentment. But this? Fabricating an entirely new story to protect his ego? It was a fresh kind of betrayal, even from a man who had specialized in them. Chloe leaned forward, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Angela. I didn't realize what kind of person he was until he started treating me the same way. He said I was too emotional, too dramatic, too clingy. He even made comments about my body, about how I should keep it tight if I didn't want to end up like you." That last line hit with a deep and familiar ache. It wasn't the insult itself, it was the realization that his cruelty was not specific to me. It was his language, his pattern, his way of shrinking women until they questioned their own worth. I let out a long, slow breath and sat back in my chair. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "Truly." She wiped her cheeks. "I wanted you to know he's trying to rewrite everything. People need to hear your version. The truth." I nodded. Not for him. Not to fight. Not to defend myself against his lies. But because the truth mattered to me. We ended the conversation gently. She apologized again before leaving, her body folding inward like someone who had finally stopped pretending she was happy. As she walked away, I realized something with startling clarity. I wasn't angry at her anymore. She wasn't the threat. She was a symptom of the man I had finally walked away from. Outside the cafe, the wind blew sharp across my cheeks. The city moved around me, bustling and unaware, but inside, something shifted into place with a click. I knew what I had to do. The next day I met with a lawyer. Not because I wanted revenge or drama or spectacle. Because I needed closure built on truth, not on the false stories he was weaving. We began the paperwork to formally separate our lives, to unravel the legal thread binding me to him. When I left the lawyer's office, I texted him a simple message. I'm moving forward with the paperwork. Please direct future communication through my attorney. No emotion. No explanation. No room for negotiation. His reply came seconds later. Unbelievable. After everything, this is how you repay me? I didn't respond. That night, lying on the small bed in Mariah's spare room, I felt a heaviness lift from my lungs. He could no longer reach me without going through someone else. His narrative no longer had control over mine. In early May, just as the weather began warming, the women's organization hosting the summer conference reached out again. They wanted a promo video. Something short, something honest. I hesitated. Being on camera felt more exposing than any stage, but Mariah convinced me. Just be your real self, she said. That's what people connect to. So I sat in her living room with a borrowed ring light and recorded a short message. My voice shook at first, but then settled. I'm Angela, I said. I'm 51. I'm rebuilding. I'm learning to live in a body that the world tells me to apologize for. I'm learning to exist without shrinking. And if you're listening to this, maybe you're learning too. You're not too late. You're not too much. You're not unworthy. You're a whole person, even in your heaviest moments. When we uploaded it, I didn't expect much. But the video took off. Not viral, not explosive, but steady. Women shared it. Therapists reposted it. A community began forming, a quiet, tender one, built on vulnerability instead of spectacle. One evening, after another long day at the hospital, I stepped out into the warm air and found Dr. Ruiz leaning against the brick wall near the entrance, sipping from a paper cup. Busy day? He asked. Always, I replied, smiling. He walked with me toward the subway, the sky streaked with pink and gold behind us. When we reached the station entrance, he hesitated. I heard about the conference, he said. Congratulations. Thank you, I replied. I'm nervous. You'll be incredible, he said. You have a way of making people feel seen. My breath caught. I wasn't used to hearing that. Not from anyone. Not ever. Before I could speak, he looked at me with an expression that wasn't romantic exactly, but something close. Something warm and steady. Something I wasn't ready for but didn't fear. If you'd ever like to get coffee sometime, not work-related, I'd enjoy that. My heart fluttered with a mixture of excitement and fear. I wasn't ready. Not fully. But the fact that someone like him saw something in me, a woman still rebuilding, still healing, still learning her own worth, felt like a balm. I smiled softly. Maybe. I'm not sure yet. Take your time, he said gently. I'm not going anywhere. As I rode the train back to Newark, I stared at my reflection in the window. I still had the same body. The same curves, the same softness. But I looked different. Brighter. More anchored. More mine. The conference arrived on a warm June morning. I stood backstage, palms sweating, heart racing. The room beyond the curtain hummed with hundreds of voices. Women who had lived entire lifetimes inside their bodies, carrying stories no one had asked to hear until now. When I stepped onto the stage, a hush fell. I took a slow breath. The lights warmed my skin. My pulse steadied. I told them everything. Not the polished version. The real one. The shame. The shrinking. The marriage that demanded smallness. The moment I walked out. The way I chose myself even when I was shaking. And then I told them the truth I had only recently learned to believe. My body is not a punishment. My life is not a consolation prize. And love, real love, doesn't require me to fit into someone else's narrow idea of beauty or worth. When I finished, the room erupted, applause rising like a wave. Women stood. Some cried openly. Some held each other. Some just nodded quietly, as if recognizing themselves in my words. After the conference, as people gathered around to speak with me, I saw him standing at the far end of the room. My husband. His face was pale, his eyes wide, as if seeing me for the first time. Not the woman he had tried to shrink, but the one who had risen without him. He took a step forward, but I lifted a hand subtly, stopping him. He froze. There was nothing to say. Not anymore. We were past repair, past explanations, past apologies that arrived too late. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Spiritually. Like a man confronted with the weight of everything he had thrown away. I walked past him without a word. Outside, sunlight washed over me. Warm. Bright. Honest. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just free. I was finally present in my own life. That evening, back in Newark, I sat at Mariah's window watching the city lights blink on one by one. I opened my phone and wrote the final note in the document I'd been keeping since the day everything shattered. I didn't lose anything when I left. I began. And then I wrote the truth that had taken me 51 years to learn. Walking away from a man who could not see my worth was the first time I walked toward myself. I set the phone down, leaned back, and closed my eyes, letting the evening breeze brush against my skin. My life wasn't perfect. It wasn't fixed. It wasn't neatly wrapped. But it was finally mine. And I had never felt more alive.